probably ready to get started, if that's okay. Welcome, everybody, to I guess it's the last episode of our STEM Success Series for spring 2021. We are delighted to have a former student back to talk to us about all the exciting things that she has been doing since she graduated. So I'm going to introduce Sarah Terpstra Hansen for us. Sarah was born, raised in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and grew up playing soccer and spending time outdoors in beautiful East Tennessee. After graduating from Oak Ridge High School in 2005, she attended Maryville College, and she majored in chemical physics with minors in philosophy, Spanish, and math. While at Maryville College, she was an Isaac Anderson Scholar, and she worked as a physics tutor, was also a member of the concert choir in the Maryville College Ambassadors Program. After she graduated in 2009, Sarah moved to Peru, South America, and volunteered with the Presbyterian Church USA Young Adult Volunteer Program. While in Peru, she lived for a year in the Andes Mountains and the Amazon rainforest, where she worked for social and environmental nonprofit organizations. And after returning to the U.S. in 2010, Sarah spent time working for environmental labs, including a stint with a small startup company that was dedicated to the removal of radioactive cesium-137 from contaminated seawater from the 2011 Fukushima nuclear disaster. She then worked as a radiochemist for Teledyne Brown Engineering, where her principal focus was operating gamma spectroscopy detectors designed to detect and identify high and low emitting isotopes. In 2016, Sarah moved to Nashville with her husband, Bradley, and joined the Division of Water Resources with the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation, where she works today. As an environmental consultant with the division, she strives to preserve and protect Tennessee's rivers and streams by writing discharge permits for industrial municipal facilities which discharge waters to the state. In addition to her job with the state, Sarah is working towards a master's degree in environmental informatics from Tech University. Outside of work and school, Sarah is most likely to be found with her husband, Tennessee state folklorist, exploring and documenting the rich and musical cultural traditions of Tennessee. In her spare time, Sarah enjoys working as an amateur photographer and loves camping and living on her hound dog, Addie. I am pleased to introduce Sarah Terpstra and excited to hear what she has to talk about today.
Thank you.
Sarah, before you start, I'm just going to remind people to mute themselves because somebody's sound is coming through.
Yeah, and can you guys see me? So if I make faces, okay, you can see me and the presentation. Okay, so as you guys probably know by now, making jokes when people's videos are off is a little awkward. I'm gonna go forward anyway. So if you guys do turn off your videos or not, whatever, I don't really care, but just pity me as I try to present, remotely. So imagine I'm there. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay, good, thank you. So I know that the presentation was listed as, that age-old silly chemistry pun about if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the precipitate. That was my working title. I have since changed it to go with the flow because I realized when I started looking at all of the work that I've done since I left Maryville College, principally I've worked with water. And that's always been a real passion of mine, a real interest of mine. And it turned out to be my career path and kind of unintentionally. So I changed the title to go with the flow. And kind of principally, I think the biggest takeaway as I was kind of going through all of the things that I've done is I've had a lot of different careers or a lot of different jobs, I should say. And to not be afraid of taking a job that might not be a career, because it will lead you to what you're meant to be doing. Okay, so we'll talk about, just so I can introduce myself a little bit, my time at Maryville College and how impactful that was, my time as a Peru young adult volunteer. And so I don't know if any of you know about that program, but I'll talk a little bit about that because that was a pretty huge experience in my life. My jobs, not careers, and then now my career with the Division of Water Resources and kind of what I mean by the difference of a job versus a career. And then kind of my takeaway reflections. I hate the term words of wisdom because it's not like I have a ton of wisdom to impart, but there are things that I maybe wish I had heard or at least digested when I was still in college. So, okay, so this is me and my dog Addie. I think the best thing about being an adult is having my own dog. She's the best little hound dog. She's very, very stubborn, but I was born in Oak Ridge, so I'm a native East Tennessean, as some of you probably are. I think the thing that really impacted me about growing up in Oak Ridge was, if any of you are aware, it's the secret city. It's got a long history of the Manhattan Project, and I think growing up there made science not so scary. It was just part of my life. My mother was my physics teacher at Oak Ridge High School. I'm still in therapy over there. Just kidding. She was a great physics teacher, but it really kind of taught me, especially as a woman, that science is for everybody. And I'm sure all of you know that you have, powerhouse women professors. And I think for me, it made it less intimidating to say, I want to major in chemical physics, which I don't think you guys have a chemical physics degree. Okay, well, went out on a high note, right?
Sarah,
yeah.
Wait a second. I think we're not seeing your slides on presenter mode because we don't see the dog.
What? Okay, hold on. Thank you. Oh my gosh. There we go. Okay, I was on the wrong.
Yeah.
What's the point if you can't see the dog, right? Okay, so yes, this is Addie. Thank you for pointing that out. Obviously important to see her. So I think the main thing was I learned to not be intimidated by the sciences. And being in East Tennessee, I searched at lots of different schools. I applied to lots of different schools, and I wound up picking Maryville College mainly because it felt like home. And I had always imagined that I would go far away. I was excited to go far away, and then I wound up going 40 minutes from home. And it was definitely the right decision for me. And I think the main thing that many of you probably have realized is the size of the community is really was really helpful for me personally. I was able to establish really strong relationships with my professors, and I felt supported and heard, and I don't know, like I belonged. And I think that was really important for me personally. And then we'll talk about my unlikely path. And like I said earlier, I didn't realize I had so many jobs until I started kind of listing them. And then it makes me seem kind of, like I've gone here and there, but we'll talk about that. Okay, so my major, as we said, was chemical physics, and I'm kind of sad that you guys don't have it anymore, but it also makes sense since I was the only chemical physics major my year. I think there was one 2 years after me, and maybe another one after that. I'm not sure. So I guess it makes sense, but it really worked for me personally because, and I'm not going to disparage any classes, but I was not an organic chemistry person. So for me personally, being a chemistry major would have been very difficult because of the organic part of it. I loved PChem. And unfortunately, I didn't take PChem until I think my last year. I know. And then it all clicked for me. It was like, oh, this is why this is my major, because I absolutely loved it. It was mind blowing to me, and it kind of pushed me into the nuclear work that I did, because it just made sense to me. So I had minors in math, philosophy, and Spanish. The math was kind of a default because I think I had all of the courses already that were required for my chemical physics degree. So I think I might have had to take one extra class for that. And then Spanish, I just had always really enjoyed. And so it was pretty simple to get a Spanish minor. So don't be afraid to take, and then the philosophy, I like to say that when I took philosophy, it was like taking my physics courses. My modern physics course and my philosophy class, we were talking about the same sort of principles, which I thought was fascinating at the time. So as as we talked earlier, some of the extra things I did, I was an MC ambassador. I was in concert choir. We got to do our first trip to Scotland. I don't know if any of you are in choir, but that was, yay! That was a really great experience. We went to Scotland. I was an Isaac Anderson scholar. Are there any Isaac Anderson scholars on here? Hey, yay, Isaac Anderson. So yes, I was an Isaac Anderson scholar. And you can see in that picture, our group, my year, for the Isaac Anderson group. And I think that was our final dinner at the House in the Woods. So, so wonderful. Anyway, so I was also a physics tutor. I wasn't very good at it. I'll admit that. I also played intramural soccer, and I did my thesis internship at ORNL. And you guys still have thesis and comps, right? Okay. So I think if I remember, the title of my thesis was The Kinetics of the Transesterification of Soy Oil Triglycerides. Don't ask me a single question about it, because I don't really remember, but it sounds good. But it was basically studying at ORNL how the production of biodiesel at the time, based on the kinetics, was you could only do it in batches. There was no method for making it continuously. And so the focus that we were working on was experimenting with ways to study the kinetics to see if we could make it continuously instead of in batches. And so that was just a couple months that I spent there. Here are my favorite classes. Dr. Turner, I don't know if you remember that picture in the top right. Now, guys, this is before you had good camera phones. So I graduated in 2009. And so that's the gold nanoparticle lab. And I still tell people about it because I was like, you could see the magnetic field lines. It was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. And so I worked really hard to get that picture because I didn't have a phone that could do it. Differential equations was one of my favorites, which surprised me at the time, but it was like solving puzzles. So I think if you approach some classes that seem terrifying because it's got a scary name, but you approach it from a perspective of, let's solve this as a puzzle, it became fun to me. So I really enjoyed that. My philosophy courses with Dr. Meyer, because he was just a wonderful, is he still teaching there? Okay, good. So I loved the philosophy classes, and I'm glad that I pursued those courses, even though they weren't necessary for my major. And so I would encourage you guys to think about courses like that might not seem relevant, but in the grand scheme of things, you'll see how things kind of tie together. And I think that was really beneficial for me. And then my J-term course, I just learned you guys don't have J-term anymore. I did Words in the Land. I don't know if you still have it for your May term course, but that was one of my favorite courses with Mr. Trevathan, and we would go on hikes and trips and encourage creative writing, different types of creative writing. So if you still have that available, I recommend it. Okay, so here's my before and after. So on the left, you have young freshman Sarah, who, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed. And I am a little bit famous. I was in 2 brochures. You're welcome. But you can definitely see how it aged me. And I gained a little weight, and I've got some bags under my eyes in the second one. That's my senior year, I believe. So don't be sad if the stress of college sometimes takes its toll. You'll bounce back. So after Maryville College, I moved to Peru, South America, with the Young Adult Volunteer Program. So raise your hand if you have heard of the Young Adult Volunteer Program. Okay, it is with the Presbyterian Church, USA, and it is a year-long volunteer program. I like to explain it like it's the Peace Corps, but only 1 year instead of 2. I don't know how they're navigating COVID right now. I know they had to evacuate the Peru Yavs last year, and I doubt they're going back this year. So, but I saw it as a gap year. I was planning on either going to seminary or grad school, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I saw this as a great opportunity to explore the world, try to do some work, and see what I felt called to do. So I started out in Mancavelica, which was an Andean town, but I was very sick with altitude sickness for about 4 months, and I just never got better. So they moved me to the Amazon, and that's not a shabby transition. But in both places, I worked with social and environmental justice organizations, nonprofits, and the work that we did was with farmers we were trying to teach them different techniques for more sustainable farming, and that was in the mountains. And in the Amazon, my work was more with social justice and helping children who had suffered from sexual abuse, or helping external communities that didn't have access to technology in any way, how they can more sustainably clean their water so that they could drink it, basic health help. And one of the focuses of Paz y Esperanza was helping deaf kids, because in many of those communities, they didn't have any resources for deaf children to learn sign language. So now all of these things may sound like, well, how did a chemical physics degree translate to any of that work? It didn't. And that's okay. So I think one of the things I learned there was, it's okay to be constantly learning. You don't have to go in and make big changes. I think I learned more from that. It was both the hard and the good. So if you get a chance to do something like that, I highly recommend it, to really experience another culture. So some of the lessons that I learned that I loved photography while I was there, which has become a side job of mine. In my intro, Dr. Gibson talked about how my husband is the state folklorist for Tennessee. And so we go to a lot of events around the state, and I'm kind of the de facto photographer, which I really love. And I also photograph weddings on the side. But that all started with my experience in Peru. And obviously my Spanish got a lot better. That was 10 years ago, so it might not be up to par now, but and then my worldview really shifted. And it was really challenging, and we can talk about that more later. But for now, so here are some of the photos. This was from my time in the Andes. And in the right picture, that's in Huaraz, which is one of the other locales in Peru. And I don't know if any of the professors had Brian Phelps, but he was serving as in the Peace Corps at the time from Maryville College. And so we met up, and it was just one of those small world, big world moments where I got to hang out with another Maryville College graduate while in Peru. And in the top left, that's the family that I lived with while I was in the mountains. And then this was my experience in the Amazon. It was what you'd imagine. I was a lot healthier because I didn't have any problems with altitude. And I felt more at home because of the trees. I was surprised that the Andes Mountains were very treeless. And in the Amazon, I just felt more like I was at home. But I also got a bunch of parasites and dengue fever. So, it's a trade-off. But I survived. So talking about some of my jobs that I've gotten with my chemical physics degree, and a lot of times it's easier to just tell people I have a chemistry degree, because essentially that's mostly what I have, with an emphasis on physics. So I started out, before I went to Peru, I did a 3-month stint as a seasonal interpretive ranger with the Cumberland Trail State Park, and that's where I met my husband. So I had to include it here because it was obviously life-changing. But that was a lot of fun. If you get a chance to work for our state parks, they're an incredible system. Then when I came back from Peru, I was a lab assistant at Pellissippi State. And then I worked as a chemist for materials and chemistry laboratory. And you can see some of the analyses that I did. And then I moved to Providence, Rhode Island with my husband while he was finishing up his doctorate at Brown. And I worked as a science educator. So as you can see, and one thing that I did leave off is I also worked as a radio chemist at Teledyne Brown Engineering in Knoxville. So I've got a lot of work with radiological work, a lot of work with, I love teaching kids science, to make science accessible and not scary to children, I think has a huge lasting impact. If it's scary as a kid, you're less likely to think that you're able to do it when you get older. And I think that that sort of encouragement for young kids is really important. So that's what I did while I was in Providence. And then this last one here is Kurion. And that is the company that we talked about earlier about cleaning up cesium-137 from contaminated seawater. So that's probably one of the most interesting and difficult jobs that I've had. So if you recall, in 2011, the Fukushima-Daiichi plant had a nuclear disaster as a result of the earthquake and tsunami. And as a result, cesium-137 contaminated seawater, there was really no way to treat it. They tried to contain it as best they could, but it was really difficult for the treatment of it. So I actually worked with a startup in Oak Ridge, and take advantage, if you're interested in nuclear stuff at all, take advantage of the fact that Oak Ridge is so close, and that there are lots of companies, because rad licenses are so easy to acquire there and they're very difficult to get, that there are a lot of smaller companies that do rad work, which is fascinating to me. So if you're interested in it, you know, consider it. So I worked with Kurion, which was a startup, and they had developed this ion exchange resin that exchanged sodium and cesium. And so, but it was all new development. So when I came on, I was hired as an administrative assistant / chemist. So that was one of my more glamorous titles. So I was responsible for purchasing and answering phones and, you know, the basic administrative tasks. And I was also working in the lab doing the experiments. And so that was, because it was such a small company, I learned a lot about how businesses are run. I learned a lot about how businesses should not be run. It was very hard to work for a startup like that because the people who were doing the starting up, it was very hard to work for them. I won't go much beyond that, but ego was an issue. But I really enjoyed the work. It was fascinating work. It felt like I was doing something beneficial to help the difficulties that were in Japan. Then it was, as I say here, it's the only US company that was selected to assist with the cleanup. It was a huge gift that I was able to start with this company. And they were doing such fantastic, fascinating science. We were creating science as it was happening. And that was really interesting to me. So this resin that was able to extract the cesium from the contaminated seawater could then be vitrified into glass, which made storage and disposal a lot easier. If you're interested more in that process, I should have included a link here, but Kurion no longer exists. It was purchased by Veolia and moved to Washington, which is why I stopped working for them. So they moved to Washington State. Richland is another national lab out in Richland, Washington. So if you're interested in that process, which I just, again, find fascinating, you can Google Veolia and they explain it in more detail on their website. So then that brings us to my current job, or my career, because all of those leading up to this career, I considered jobs that led me to, I learned a lot about myself, what I was interested in, how I could apply my degree. And so I started with the Division of Water Resources with the state of Tennessee, with the Enforcement and Compliance Unit. And it was not glamorous at first. I thought it would just be another job because I thought I was destined to work in nuclear because I enjoyed it. I thought it was interesting. I thought that's where I would be. So when I was hired by the division, I did not expect it to be a long-term career. And then I found that the feeling of, again, working in water, I felt like it was my calling. I felt that's what I was drawn to. So I started writing directors and commissioners orders. If you've never heard of those, I hadn't either. They are legal orders that are written against violators. So people who have polluted streams, people who are disregarding laws regarding water quality control. And so I learned a lot about the legal system and what an order even was. I learned a lot about how trials work. I actually served as a witness in one trial, which was extremely stressful. I have church camp for deaf kids there because that was one of my first orders I was supposed to write. And, you know, everyone's like, oh, you're doing such great work protecting our waters. But then I got an order against a sewage treatment plant, a small sewage treatment plant at a church camp for deaf kids. I was like, I don't want to write a penalty order against these people. Thankfully, they came into compliance. And so we were able to dismiss the order. But, you know, it's one of those things that reminds you, if people aren't, no matter who you are, if you are polluting the waters of the state, you have to be held accountable. And luckily, the fear of getting an order brought them back into compliance. And sometimes that's what it takes. But yes, I learned a lot about, I've worked with a lot of lawyers now. I learned about how laws are written into our Tennessee code. I learned a lot about the EPA and how those laws and regulations are adopted by different states and then are implemented by those states. And so I worked there for about 2 years, and then I recently joined the water-based permit unit. And that's where I'm working today. And so I basically write orders. Permits. And so this includes sewage treatment plants, industrial permits, small domestic permits. So I have some of my favorite examples of my permits. I've got TVA Sequoia Nuclear, since I'm one of the few people that has nuclear experience and familiarity. I have a lot of the nuclear plants and write the permits for those. And sewage treatment plants, that's the less glamorous side. I like to say my husband gets paid to go to festivals across the state, and I get paid to go to sewage treatment plants. It's really, really wonderful. But it is fascinating, actually, because everybody poops, you know. If you don't know where that goes, it's really interesting. So other permits that I have written or am about to write for the Lost Sea, if you've never been there, it's a great place. The Jack Daniel's Distillery, all of these places discharge effluent to waters of the state, and they all have to be regulated. And then the zoo, I wrote one for the Nashville Zoo because stormwater is a real concern in the state too, especially with animals and nutrients. So those are some of the examples of permits that I write. It's very interesting. We essentially have to learn the difference between implementing limits based on technology. So how a sewage treatment plant has limits based on how well their treatment plant is supposed to perform. It's not based on whether it's going to pollute the stream or not. It's based on, you have this plant, it must meet these specifications, versus limits that are based on water quality. So that's saying if you have a stream that is impaired for nitrogen, you have to implement different limits that are not based on technology. It's based on protecting the receiving stream for nitrogen or ammonia or different examples like that. So there's a lot of interpreting guidelines from EPA. There's a lot of interpreting guidelines that are adopted into our state rules. And there's a lot of calculation that's involved and using logic and judgment. And I think that that's one of the things that I think I learned from Maryville College was using your whole brain and not just, how can you do this calculation? Okay, well, if you can't explain it or if you can't implement it correctly, what does it matter? So I think that was one of the benefits of having such a robust liberal arts education is my writing skills were very strong, as well as my science skills. And so being able to kind of marry those things in my current career feels very fulfilling, and to feel like I'm at home and I'm protecting, the waters of the state of Tennessee is a very satisfying job. So if any of you are graduating and interested, I highly recommend working for the state. It's very predictable and a safe job to have during a pandemic. I've been working from home for a year. I've gone on a few site visits. but it's one of those jobs that I never would have pictured. I never even really knew of it as an option for me. But working for the state is very satisfying. And then, so coming to my reflections, just generally, I think Maryville College, like I was just saying, gave me a lot of confidence in my different skills. It allowed me to explore some different things that I don't think I would have explored otherwise. Thesis comps, don't get frustrated. I was very stressed out. I'm sure they don't remember my comps experience, but I think I was asked some simple question to PV equals NRT or something, and I just blanked. I couldn't remember anything. So don't freak out. I still passed. I'm still doing okay. But I think it seemed stressful at the time, but you'll get through it and you'll be better for it. You'll feel more confident writing papers later on and defending your work. I like to joke. So I'm in a master's program now at TTU and in environmental informatics, and my classes currently are easier than the classes I took at Maryville College. So that might not be true all the way around, especially if you're going to med school, but for me personally, Maryville College prepared me, and I was pretty nervous going back to school after 10 years. But that also is going to my words of wisdom. Grad school is not a must. And I think if you want to go to grad school, pursue it with all your might, but don't feel like you have to. And I think that that's one thing that I felt intimidated when I was in Maryville College. I thought if I was going to be a success, I needed to go to grad school. Both of my parents have their PhD. My husband has his PhD. And my husband, again, who has his PhD, told me, don't do it. He said, if you can get a job that you love and want without it, is it worth the stress? If you have a job that you have to get an advanced degree for, then do it, but don't feel pressured because it's just the obvious next step. And maybe I'm not, maybe that's not a popular opinion, but it took me a long time to learn that. And I think that that's brought me around to where I am today. I have now since gone back to grad school because it's what I want. And it's a degree that matches the passion that I've learned that I have. Instead of just going to grad school because it's the obvious next step, now I'm pursuing environmental informatics, which is learning how to take data and apply it in a logical way for environmental protection. And I wouldn't have found this degree if I had gone straight to grad school or seminary, which was out of left field anyway. So go with the flow. Don't be afraid to take a job. If it doesn't seem like it's going to be a career, that's okay. You'll be surprised by how much you learn from it. Be authentic and be flexible. Be authentic to yourself. I have hired people in my current job, and you can tell when someone is trying to say something that they think you want to hear. So don't be afraid to be yourself, be authentic, own the things that you're good at, and also the things that you need to work on. It's okay to be honest about that. Be honest with yourself, honor your skills. I think I have strong writing skills, and my current job emphasizes both my science and my writing. And I think that that's been really beneficial. And don't be afraid to try new things. So that's kind of my presentation on how I got to where I am and how Maryville College helped me get there. And maybe some of these things are jobs or careers that you didn't even think were possible with whatever degree you're pursuing. If you know what you want to do, yeah, go at it with abandon. But don't be afraid if you're still not sure, because I wasn't. So I went to Peru, and look where I am now. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. If anybody has any questions, and yes, I realize that's not the most flattering picture of me, but it was on graduation day, so what can you do? Okay, stop share. So does anybody have any questions about Peru, about the AV program, about working for the state and what that's like?
I was just going to ask about when you worked at the startup company, would you say that despite the fact that, I guess, bigger picture, if you had a job and you didn't necessarily like the people you worked with, but you really loved what you were doing, do you think that disliking the people you work with or your boss overshadows that?
That's a really tricky question. I think it can. I'm a very sensitive person, and I'm a very social person. And for me, the negativity, I was being talked down to, and there was a lot of stress between everyone else, and I kind of absorbed that. But I also think that if they hadn't moved to Washington, I probably would have worked there longer because I loved the work. It was so interesting to me. And so I would suggest, if you do find yourself in a situation like that, don't hurry to leave, because a lot of times the negative people are negative because they're unhappy where they are, and they might leave first. and I think if you love the work you're doing, to a certain extent, it can balance any negativity that you're dealing with. But it can be very hard to be with difficult coworkers. But overall, I was so fulfilled with the work that I was doing, and I felt like I was learning so much that yes, if they had stayed in Oak Ridge, I probably would have stayed a little bit longer. But I probably wouldn't have made it my career. I would have learned what I could, and maybe took it somewhere else, because the negativity was so strong.
Thank you.
No problem. Anybody else? Anybody else love PChem? No?
I don't think anyone else on here has taken PChem yet.
Oh,
This is
well, you
looking.
look forward to it. The gold nanoparticle, are they still doing that lab? Good. That was my favorite.
Sarah,
Yes.
are there some experiences or some things that you learned in Peru that you feel like are practical, useful things that you're applying in your current position?
Yeah, I think when I went to Peru, I naively thought, I'm going to go make a difference in the world. And it was a naive perspective, because I don't know anything about slash and burn farming. You know, it was when I changed my perspective from, well, and let me back up, because one of the most difficult things of that experience was I was treated that way. I was treated as an expert, because they would introduce me as this gringa from the United States who was an engineer. I wasn't an engineer. I didn't know anything about what they were doing. And I was being treated as an expert just because I was white from the United States. And they thought I was an engineer. And that was really, it's hard to describe how disturbing that was to me and how uncomfortable that was for me. So I learned how to be a better listener. And I learned how to ask more questions, and I learned how to be more vulnerable by not pretending like I was the expert. And I think that since then, I have learned much more patience than I had before I went. Patience with myself and patience with other people, and just being open about the things that I don't know. And I think a lot of times after school, you want to be confident, and you want to be right, and you want to prove how much you know. And sometimes that can backfire if you don't know anything. And so I think I learned how to be a better student when I went to Peru. And so I in my current job, I'm not afraid to say if I don't understand something, or if I need to take some time to research it before I make any call or decision. And I think that has made me more valuable to my employers, is to be able to be vulnerable and say, I don't know this yet. And I think that was that, and patience, because I don't know if any of you have been to a third world country or Latin American country, but my first day on the job, they told me that the workday started at 9. So I got there at 8:50 and the doors were locked. and I sat on the floor on the ground outside the building for 45 minutes. They didn't open until 10. So I learned to be flexible. I learned to be patient. And I learned that that's okay to admit if you don't know something.
Thank you.
No problem. And for what it's worth, I looked at my old Facebook messages with Dr. Gibson, and right before the previous message to arranging this get together, our messages were while I was in Peru, and we were sharing stories about some of the things I was dealing with while I was in Peru. So that's the other thing is don't be afraid to maintain relationships with your professors beyond your experience at Maryville College. Oh, gotta go to chapel because he's an IA scholar. Say hi to Anne for me. Okay, bye.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.
See ya.
Sarah, is your blog from that time in Peru still up?
It is. It is. And I actually was kind of going down memory lane last night. I am pretty sure it, and if you Google, I think if you Google from the Andes to the Amazon, it'll come up with my blog, and that'll talk about a little of my experience with the YAV program. If you are interested in the YAV program at all, I suggest it talks about kind of the hard parts of living in Peru and adapting to that life. And I think it talks a little bit about what it's like to work with the YAV program. But yeah, if you Google from the Andes to the Amazon, I think it's a WordPress blog. I mean, it is 10 years old, so it should be there.
It is. It's here. I found it. I'm going to throw the link. I'm going to throw the link in the chat. I've also, I'm more than happy to allow more people to ask questions, but because I know people are filtering out, I've put a link in the chat to our survey that we need.
Sorry.
That's okay. We have a survey that and this is for everybody, students, faculty, staff, non-students, anybody here, if you wouldn't mind. It's a very brief survey, and it has to do with the fact that all this programming is due to an NSF grant, and NSF asks us to do actual work besides get together with alumni who we love. So if you guys could help us out by clicking that link before you go, make sure you have that. And now I'm going to put Sarah's link in the chat here too.
Maria, Sarah Terpstra is Bill Meyer.
Hey, it's so good to see you. I talked about you during my presentation.
Oh, did you? I was meeting with a different student before I clicked in, so I'm sorry I missed that. I just want to say to everybody that in my nearly 25 years teaching at Maryville College, Sarah Terpstra was one of my favorites. Walking into the classroom every day and seeing her smiling face was one of the great rewards of teaching. And it touches back to what Sarah said about being authentic, being yourself as you go through from college into your post-college life. Sarah Terpstra is one of the most genuine people I've ever had the pleasure of knowing, and she embodies the best of Maryville College people. She studied philosophy with me, but she studied chemistry with Dr. Turner and Dr. Gibson and so forth. Yes, and Sarah is a tribute to Maryville College and to the state of Tennessee, and the state is lucky to have her back here. Are you living in Oak Ridge?
I'm in Nashville.
Oh, you're in Nashville.
I'm in Nashville. I'm working for the state Division of Water Resources.
Yeah.
And I'll put my email in the chat. So anybody who has questions about, and you want to talk to me outside of this forum, I'm totally interested in talking with you, and you're welcome to pick my brain. I don't know how much I could help, but yes, Dr. Meyer, I talked about how my philosophy classes with you were some of my favorite. So you got a shout out.
I was so glad when I saw Dr. Siopsis's email today saying that you were going to be on the lunch chat. So it's great to see you, Sarah, and thank you for all that you do for the state of Tennessee and for modeling what Maryville College education is all about.
Thank you so much.
Any other questions for Sarah?
Well, before I forget, let me put my email address. And you are welcome to email me or not. but I love to talk clearly, so feel free.
Okay, again, don't forget to do the survey for us, and let's all thank Sarah in whatever Zoom way we can thank her. Thanks so much, Sarah, for doing this for us. I hope next time it will be in person.
Yes.
In a huggable time.
I will come visit. Almost got my second shot, so I will make it a priority. Maybe a homecoming this year.
Awesome.
Bye, everybody.
Right down to the last few. There we are.
Guys, I miss you. Thank you for having me.
We miss
I had
you.
a lot of fun.
All right. Well, we'll see you in person, I hope soon. Thanks again so much.
Okay, bye.
Bye. Are we meeting Thursday? Oh, wait.
Yeah.
Can you
Yes.
stop recording for a second?
Meeting Thursday.